Nicholas Grant's reputation as one of Ravenhill's most ruthless millionaires preceded him. In his glass-walled office overlooking the towering skyline, he sat with a presence as cold and polished as the marble beneath his feet. Every detail of his life was calculated, and this marriage would be no exception. $10 million. 2 years of marriage, a medical examination to confirm virginity. Non-negotiable, Nicholas said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Across from him, the director of a high-profile matchmaking agency adjusted his tie nervously. Mr. Grant, your request is unusual but not outside the scope of our work. We guarantee discretion and precision. I expect nothing less. I don't want surprises or mistakes, Nicholas replied, his tone devoid of warmth. He leaned back in his chair, his sharp grey eyes fixed on the man until he lowered his gaze in discomfort. The director nodded, sweat beading at his temple. The candidates will be informed of all terms. Your confidentiality is guaranteed. Confidentiality and efficiency, Nicholas interrupted. That's what I'm paying for. When the door finally closed behind the man, the office returned to silence. Nicholas stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, his gaze sweeping across Ravenhill's skyline. The city lights flickered like distant stars, but he barely saw them. His mind was occupied with the contract lying on his desk, every clause written with surgical precision to protect him from complications. This was not a marriage for love. It was a transaction, a way to fulfill his grandmother's last wish. Without opening himself to the chaos of emotions he had long learned to avoid, relationships he had discovered were liabilities. Trust was a luxury he would never again allow himself. He poured a glass of whiskey, his reflection staring back at him from the window. The amber liquid burned his throat as he swallowed, but it did nothing to quiet the faint unease stirring inside him. Why did this deal, so logical and flawless, carry the weight of something deeper? He shook off the thought. Feelings were irrelevant. Across the city, in a quiet, worn-down kitchen, Isabelle Carter sat with the advertisement spread on the table in front of her. The words seemed unreal. $10 million. 2 years of marriage. It read like a fairy tale or a trap. She traced the print with her fingers, her heart pounding as she considered the impossible choice before her. Through the half-open door, she could hear her younger siblings, Peter and Leela, laughing as they played. They didn't know about the past due notices stacked under the fruit bowl, or the nights Isabel spent awake, wondering how to keep them fed and sheltered. Her mother's voice broke through her thoughts. Staring at that paper again. You'll lose your mind before you make a decision. Isabel quickly slipped the ad under a pile of bills. Just organizing, she lied. But her chest tightened. Pride told her to rip the paper to shreds. Desperation told her she had no other choice. That night, when the house was dark and quiet, Isabel unfolded the advertisement again. The sharp letters seemed to mock her, daring her to make a move. She stood by the window, her reflection staring back, a young woman trapped between fear and responsibility. Her hand trembled as she reached for the phone. When the line connected, a smooth, professional voice answered, Grant Agency. How may I help you? She swallowed hard. I'm calling about the advertisement. I'm interested. A pause followed, heavy with unspoken weight. Then the voice replied, We will send you the details of the selection process. When she hung up, Isabel pressed the phone to her chest. The reality of what she had just done settling over her like a storm. She had taken the first step toward something that could save her family or change her life forever. Isabelle Carter sat on the edge of her bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The envelope from the Grant Agency lay on the comforter, unopened. She had received it 2 days ago, and though she already knew what it contained, her chest still tightened. At the thought of its contents, the selection process had been swift. Interviews conducted behind polished glass doors, psychological evaluations, and a medical examination she tried not to think about. Every step had stripped away layers of her pride, replacing them with practicality and resolve. Now, the final approval had arrived. She had been chosen. Downstairs, her mother hummed softly in the kitchen, unaware that her eldest daughter was preparing to enter a world that none of them could truly understand. Isabel pressed her palm to her chest, forcing her heart to settle. A luxury car picked her up from the edge of their quiet neighborhood. The driver didn't speak much, just confirmed her name and opened the door. As they moved through Ravenhill's bustling streets, the buildings grew taller, colder. The houses became manors. When the car finally stopped outside the glass and marble skyscraper of Grant Enterprises, Isabel's breath caught in her throat. She stepped out slowly, her heels clicking on the polished stone, and was led to a private elevator that ascended without a single interruption. The meeting room was spacious and silent, with windows that overlooked the skyline. Nicholas Grant stood by one of them, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit. He turned as she entered, and for a moment, neither of them said a word. He was every bit as intimidating as the articles described, sharp-featured, cold-eyed, with a presence that seemed carved from stone. "Miss Carter," he said finally. Extending a hand, Isabel crossed the room and shook it, startled by the faint jolt that traveled up her arm when their skin touched. "Mr. Grant, thank you for agreeing to meet me." He gestured to the chair across from his chair. She sat, folding her hands in her lap. The room smelled faintly of leather and cedar. Nicholas opened a folder and slid it across the glass table. "This is the contract. It contains everything we discussed, including the medical verification." Isabel's eyes dropped to the papers. Her throat tightened as she read the first few lines. Everything was there: her responsibilities, the 2-year duration, the exact amount to be transferred into a trust for her family. Nicholas's voice broke the silence. "You should know, everything is confidential. No one outside this room will know the terms unless you choose to share them." She looked up at him. There was no emotion in his voice, but something in his gaze lingered. Not cold exactly, but unreadable. He slid a pen toward her. For a heartbeat, she hesitated. Then she signed. When it was done, Nicholas collected the documents and placed them back in the folder with precise mechanical movements. But his eyes remained on her, thoughtful. "Welcome to the agreement, Miss Carter." She stood, her legs slightly unsteady. "Thank you." Nicholas didn't move, but his gaze followed her to the door. Just before she exited, she felt it, that subtle shift in the air, as if something had begun to stir beneath the surface. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Isabel leaned back against the wall, her heart thudding loud in her ears. She had signed away 2 years of her life. But what she hadn't expected, not really, was the man behind the contract. Cold, controlled, and yet something else. The wrought iron gate creaked open slowly, revealing the grand facade of Grant Estate. Wide marble steps led to towering white columns, and rows of manicured hedges lined the driveway like soldiers standing in formation. From the back seat of the sleek black car, Isabelle Carter stared out, her grip tight on the handle of her small suitcase. It looked like something out of a magazine, perfect, untouchable, just like the man who owned it. The car rolled to a stop at the entrance. 2 house staff members stepped forward in silent unison, opening her door. Isabel stepped out, her heels clicking against the stone. The cool air hit her skin, and the scale of it all made her feel impossibly small. Then she heard Itty's voice. "Miss Carter." Nicholas stood at the top of the steps, backlit by the light spilling from inside the estate. He was dressed in another perfectly fitted suit, dark against the pale backdrop, his expression as unreadable as ever. "Welcome," he said. "I trust your journey was comfortable." "Yes," she replied, her voice steady, despite the nerves crawling under her skin. He gave a slight nod and turned, gesturing for her to follow. Isabel stepped forward, suitcase in hand, her pulse echoing with every step she took into his world. The interior was just as pristine: marble floors, glittering chandeliers, walls lined with art that probably belonged in a museum. "This will be your home for the next 2 years," Nicholas said, as they walked through the vast foyer. "If you need anything, the staff will be available at all hours." His tone was polite, but distant. There was no warmth, no familiarity Isabel took in the surroundings, gilded molding, the faint scent of lemon polish, the cold perfection of it all. Nothing here felt lived in. They stopped at the entrance to a grand living room, where two housemaids waited quietly near the staircase. "They'll show you to your room," Nicholas said, turning to face her. She nodded, grateful for the break, in formality, for a chance to breathe. But just as he began to turn away, there was a pause in his stride so brief it could have been imagined, like he'd thought of saying something, but changed his mind. Then he walked off. Disappearing into the hallway, Isabel followed the maids upstairs. Her room was beautiful vaulted ceilings, soft grey walls, a canopied bed she didn't dare sit on. As the door closed behind her, she let the suitcase fall to the floor and exhaled. She had crossed the threshold into a world of wealth and rules, elegance and silence. And yet, somewhere inside, a voice whispered, "Don't lose yourself here. Not to the mansion, not to the money, not even to Nicholas Grant." The days that followed settled into a rhythm of quiet. Strange rhythm Isabelle Carter couldn't quite adjust to. The estate was enormous. Hallways that echoed with silence, staircases that spiraled like ivory sculptures, rooms that looked untouched by time. She wandered through them, trying to get used to the weight of marble under her feet, the hushed footsteps of staff, the grandeur. That never felt like home. Breakfasts were served in a dining room too large for two people. A long table stretched between them like a moat. And despite the warm chandelier light, the space always felt cold. Nicholas never said much. He always appeared dressed to perfection, reading over reports or checking his phone. His presence filled the room, but his silence built walls she didn't know how to climb. She'd pick at croissants or sip black coffee while glancing across at him. He never looked up, until one morning, when the silence cracked just slightly. "Is something not to your liking?" he asked without looking away from his tablet. Isabel blinked. "No, it's just, I'm not used to this." He finally looked at her. His grey eyes studied her with the same intensity he brought to his business. Though this time there was a flicker of something curiosity, maybe. He didn't say anything else, but it was the first moment he saw her. Not as a name on a contract, but as a person. Later that day, she walked the gardens alone. Rain had started to fall, soft and steady, soaking the roses along the pathways. She held an umbrella, but stood still in front of a marble statue, a woman carved in perfect serenity. The rain clung to her coat. Goosebumps rose on her arms. And still, she didn't move. She felt more connected to that cold stone figure than she did to anything inside that house. Unbeknownst to her, Nicholas watched from the upstairs study. He saw the way she stood still, in the rain, not rushing for shelter like so many others would have. She didn't run from discomfort. She met it head-on. Most people who entered his world tried too hard to belong. Isabel wasn't trying at all, and, somehow, that made her presence louder, stronger. That night, she wrote a letter to her mother and siblings. She told them she was fine. She didn't mention the silence, or the way the mansion sometimes felt, like a gilded cage. But she also didn't say she regretted it, because deep down, a spark of determination had taken root. She wouldn't just endure this place, she would survive it without losing herself. Meanwhile, in the study above, Nicholas poured himself another glass of whiskey and stared at the window, where raindrops traced lazy lines down the glass. He found his thoughts drifting to her more than they should have, and that unsettled him more than anything. The mansion was quiet that night, almost too quiet. The only sound was the soft ticking of an antique clock in the hallway, and the occasional whisper of wind brushing against the windows. Isabelle Carter stepped out of the bathroom, wrapped in a silk robe that felt too fine to foreign against her skin. She moved slowly, her bare feet brushing the carpet, each step making her more aware of where she was and who she was sharing this house with. As she crossed the doorway into her bedroom, she stopped. Nicholas Grant was seated in the armchair by the window. A glass of red wine rested in his hand, his gaze distant as he watched the night through the glass. The room was dim, lit only by a single lamp that cast warm shadows over his face. He looked relaxed, but there was a stillness to him that felt fragile. He turned when he heard her, his expression unreadable. "Are you comfortable?" he asked, his voice lower than usual, edged with something softer. She nodded. "Yes, thank you." He set the glass down gently. "You don't have to feel obligated to anything," he said, standing slowly. His movements were careful, not commanding. "This agreement doesn't mean you owe me more than you've already given." Isabel's fingers curled around the edge of her robe, her heart thudding a little too hard. There was something in his tone, not cold, not distant, something almost human. "I know," she said quietly. Nicholas took a step closer, then paused. The air between them seemed to hum. He raised a hand slowly, carefully, as if she might shatter if he moved too fast, and brushed his fingertips against her cheek. The touch was light, deliberate. "I don't want tonight to be remembered with fear," he said. "I want it to mean something, even if neither of us planned it." Isabel exhaled, her breath shaky but steady. Her eyes searched his, and for once, there was no mask there. Just a man, unsure but trying. He stepped back, offering space, waiting. And for the first time, Isabel didn't feel like she was being pushed. She was being asked. She closed the space between them. Her hand found his chest, resting gently over his heart. She felt its steady beat beneath her palm. Nicholas didn't move, just watched her with something close to awe. When she leaned in, it wasn't out of obligation, it was her choice, her pace, her moment. What followed wasn't rushed. It wasn't calculated. It was slow, careful, emotional. Every kiss was a question. Every touch was an answer. Nicholas, the man who built walls so high no one could climb them, lowered them if only for a night, and Isabel, the girl who had come here for money and survival, found something she hadn't expected: tenderness. When they finally lay together beneath the soft light, breathless and quiet, Isabel rested her head on his shoulder and closed her eyes. She felt safe. Nicholas looked down at her, his hand resting gently on her back. Something had changed between them, not spoken aloud, not defined, but real. And as he watched her drift to sleep, a single unnerving thought struck him. This wasn't just a contract anymore. He didn't want it to end. Morning sunlight spilled through the wide windows of the kitchen, warming the countertops and glinting off the polished silverware. Isabelle Carter sat at the island, barefoot, wearing a soft linen blouse and sipping fresh coffee from a porcelain mug. She watched as Nicholas Grant moved around the kitchen with quiet purpose. He was making coffee himself. No staff, no instruction, just him, sleeves rolled, pouring hot water with practiced ease. "I didn't think you knew how to make coffee," she said softly, raising an eyebrow with a half smile. He glanced at her, then at the mug in his hand. "Not everything needs assistance. Some things are better when you do them yourself." She accepted the cup. He slid toward her, the heat seeping into her fingers. "You might have a hidden talent." Nicholas gave a soft laugh, rare sound, low and unfamiliar, like a part of him he hadn't used in a long time. "I wouldn't go that far," he said. They drank in silence, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It felt easy, natural. Later that afternoon, they walked together through the garden. Autumn light filtered through the trees, painting the petals of the rose bushes in golden hues. Nicholas stopped in front of a row of blooms and gestured gently. "My grandmother planted these. She said the most beautiful things are those that survive storms." Isabel crouched slightly, brushing her fingers over a blossom. "They're lovely." She must have been proud of them. She was, he said, quietly. "She used to sit here with me for hours, telling me that beauty without resilience is fragile." She was the only person who believed in Metroli. Isabel looked up at him. "She sounds like she was important to you." Nicholas's gaze lingered on the flowers. "She was everything I never deserved." The vulnerability in his voice surprised her. She stood slowly, not saying anything, but staying close enough to let him know he didn't have to explain further. That evening, they ate dinner in the smaller dining room. No staff, no performance, just the two of them, and the warmth of flickering candlelight. She told him about her childhood, about late night studying while her mother worked double shifts, about her siblings and their laughter, about the quiet kind of love that keeps a family running even when there's nothing in the fridge. Nicholas listened, really listened, then, for the first time, he told her about himself, stories of boarding school, loneliness, trying to prove himself in a world where affection was earned through achievement. The layers between them began to peel away. Hours passed unnoticed. When they finally settled on the living room couch, each with a glass of wine in hand, neither of them spoke, but the silence felt full, not empty. Nicholas looked across at her. His expression was no longer guarded. It was soft, and Isabel smiled at him like she finally saw him, not the name, not the billionaire, but the man. Out in the garden, the wind rustled the trees. Inside, something even quieter bloomed between them, delicate, steady, unspoken dot, and for the first time in his life, Nicholas Grant felt the calm weight of something real. Nicholas Grant sat alone in his office, his desk strewn with reports and financial updates. The late afternoon light cast long shadows across the floor, and the silence around him was heavy with thought. He reached for a folder he hadn't seen before, misplaced among the standard paperwork. Attached to it was a note from his head of security, brief and factual. Nicholas opened it. Inside were financial records. Names he recognized jumped out at him immediately. Carter. His eyes scanned line after line: overdue bills, foreclosure threats, medical costs, grocery receipts. Every number was a glimpse into Isabel's past, into the pressure she had endured alone. The longer he read, the more the air in the room thickened. This wasn't a woman who saw $10 million and got greedy. This was a daughter, a sister, a protector. And suddenly, the moment she signed that contract, flashed back to him. How steady her hand was. How silent her eyes were. She hadn't done it for herself. She had done it for them. Nicholas leaned back in his chair, the folder still open, his fingers interlaced as he stared at the ceiling. He had built his life on the belief that no one did anything without that love was a currency with strings attached. But Isabelle Carter had rewritten that belief, quietly, without ever saying a word. That evening, he found her in the greenhouse, a place she had quietly turned into her sanctuary. She was bent over, a potted fern, gently cleaning the dust from its wide green leaves. Her expression was focused, peaceful. For a long moment, Nicholas stood in the doorway, watching her. The woman who had entered his life as a contract now moved through his home. Like a quiet storm, soft but impossible to ignore. "It seems this place has become your refuge," he said finally. Isabel looked up, startled at first, then softened. "It's peaceful here, I can think." He stepped inside, reaching for a nearby vine, and running his fingers along the leaves. "I didn't know you had so much patience for this." "Maybe it's not patience," she replied, setting her cloth down. "Sometimes caring for something helps you find peace." He met her gaze across the scattered pots and green vines. Her words stayed with him, echoing deeper than she knew. "I think I'm starting to understand that," he said. "Understand what?" she asked, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "What it means to put someone else before yourself." A faint blush colored her cheeks, but she didn't look away. "I think, when you love someone, it's not a choice, you just do it." Nicholas exhaled slowly, and in that moment, he realized she wasn't just part of a deal anymore. She was becoming the very foundation of the life he never knew he wanted. That night, even as he returned to his study and buried himself in routine again, he couldn't stop thinking about her, about the burden she carried with such quiet strength, and for the first time, he didn't just admire her, he needed her. The storm outside mirrored the one inside her chest. Rain pounded against the tall windows of the dining room, wind howling through the trees outside as lightning flickered in the distance. Isabel sat at one end of the impossibly long table. Her half-finished dinner growing cold, she pushed at it with her fork, eyes distant, breath shallow. At the other end, Nicholas flipped through a report, seemingly unbothered by the silence. But she felt it. The weight, the wall, the ache that had started to grow in her chest was now impossible to ignore. She dropped her fork. The sound echoed like a crack in glass. "I can't do this anymore, Nicholas." He looked up slowly, eyebrows drawn together. "What do you mean?" "You know exactly what I mean," she said, her voice sharp but trembling. "This marriage, this agreement, it can't keep going like this, not if it stays a performance." He set the report down. "We've fulfilled the conditions of the contract, Isabel. I don't understand what else you expect from me. It's not about the contract." She stood now, the frustration spilling over. "It's about us. About what I feel, and what you're clearly terrified to admit." Nicholas's jaw tightened, his hands clenched around the arms of the chair. The cold armor he wore was cracking but still not breaking. "You can't keep hiding behind that distance," she continued, voice faltering under the weight of her pain. "Not with me. I've been honest since the beginning. I've given you everything I could. But if you're not willing to do the same," she hesitated, tears rising behind her eyes, "then I can't stay." Nicholas stood now too, tension radiating from him. "It's not that simple for me. And you think it's been simple for me," she snapped, voice cutting through the tension like a blade. She took a step toward him, desperate to break the invisible wall between them. "I've been trying for us since the beginning, but I can't be the only one trying." The room fell silent. The air felt tight. Finally, Isabel shook her head and turned, walking toward the door. Her footsteps echoed on the marble like thunder. "Isabel," he said softly. She paused, but didn't turn around. "When you're ready to be honest with yourself, you'll know where to find me." Then she was gone. Nicholas remained frozen, staring at the door as it shut behind her. The rain beat harder against the windows. But the loudest sound in the room was silence. And for the first time in years, he felt it a deep, unbearable void. Not from losing control, but from losing her. The rain had followed her. Isabelle Carter sat wrapped in a knit blanket on the front porch of her childhood home. The same creaky swing she used to rock her siblings on, now holding the weight of everything she had left behind. The wind was cool, brushing against her skin, but the ache inside her chest was deeper than any cold. She had walked away from the mansion, from the contract, from the man she hadn't expected to care for, and still, all she could think about was him, Nicholas Grant. The man who had buried himself in walls. The man who had let her in just enough for it to hurt. Footsteps crunched against the gravel. Slow, purposeful. She turned her head and froze. There he was, standing at the gate. No driver, no umbrella, no polished perfection. Just him, drenched, breathless, human. "Nicholas," she said, standing slowly, her voice caught between surprise and disbelief. He walked closer. His coat was soaked, his hair messy from the wind, but his eyes, they were clear, determined. "Was a coward," he said. She blinked. "What?" "I hid behind my past. Behind excuses. Behind control." His voice shook slightly, but he didn't stop. "But you, Isabel, you showed me what it meant to care for someone without expecting anything back." She folded her arms across her chest, holding herself steady. "That's not enough, Nicholas. Words aren't enough." "I know." He nodded, stepping closer. "That's why I'm not just saying them." He dropped to one knee, not with a ring, not with fanfare, but with humility. "I don't want a perfect life. I want our life, flaws and all. I want to try, really try, to be the man you believed I could be." Tears welled in Isabel's eyes, her breath caught in her throat. "Why now?" she whispered. "Because I couldn't breathe without you," he said. "Because going back to that house without you in it felt empty in a way I never thought possible." The rain softened. The sky cleared. And in that moment, she saw him, not the contract, not the reputation, just Nicholas. Just the man who came back. "I'll give you one chance," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But you don't get to run from this again." "I won't." She reached for him. He rose slowly, gently cupping her face with his hands. And when their lips met, it wasn't rushed or desperate, it was real, it was earned, it was the beginning of everything they'd never dared to hope for. Morning light streamed through the soft white curtains of the country house, casting a warm glow on everything it touched. Outside, The garden bloomed with fresh flowers Isabel had planted herself, roses, lavender, daisies, quiet symbols of the life she and Nicholas were building. Inside, the aroma of fresh coffee drifted from the kitchen. Isabel stood by the counter, her fingers trembling slightly as she held a small white envelope. She had already read the letter 3 times, but her eyes returned to it again and again. Positive, her heart raced, her lips parted to speak, but before she could gather the words, footsteps approached. Nicholas entered. Hair tousled, sleeves rolled up, eyes going straight to her face. His gaze sharpened the moment he saw her expression. "What is it?" he asked, pouring a cup of coffee but watching her carefully. "Are you okay?" She swallowed, nodded, and held out the envelope. "I need to show you something." He took it, opened it slowly, and scanned the letter. His eyes widened, his jaw clenched. And then, something shifted. "This is real?" he asked, his voice barely more than a breath. She nodded. "I'm pregnant." For a long moment, Nicholas didn't move. Then, with a quiet exhale, he stepped forward and gently took her hands in his. "This changes everything," he said. But there was no panic in his voice, only wonder. "I don't want it to be a burden," she whispered, tears brimming. Didn't know if this would be too much. He stopped her with a kiss to her forehead, his hands cradling hers. "Isabel," he said, "steady now. You already changed my life in ways I never imagined. This isn't a burden. This is a gift." Later that day, they walked through the garden hand in hand, talking about names, nurseries, and how they wanted to raise their child far from the coldness of the past. "I promise I'll be the man you and our child need," he said, stopping to look at her. "You don't have to be perfect," she replied, her voice filled with quiet strength. "You just have to be present." And he was. Weeks turned into months. They moved into the country house, permanently trading boardrooms for sunlit porches, silence for laughter. Nicholas handed more control of the company to his trusted team. Stepping away from the world that had once defined him, Isabel wrote weekly letters to her family. Her siblings visited often, filling the yard with laughter and muddy footprints. And Nicholas, once stiff and cold, carried trays of lemonade, helped plant herbs, and never missed a single doctor's appointment. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the hills, Isabel stood on the back porch with Nicholas beside her. She took his hand and guided it to her belly. He felt it, the smallest flutter. "This is where everything begins," she whispered. He turned to her, eyes filled with quiet emotion. "And I'll spend the rest of my life making it worthy of you both." As stars filled the sky, they stood there, to people who had once made a contract to avoid love, now bound by the very thing they'd tried so hard to escape. Love. The kind that changes everything. Forever.